Now, the Brookings Institute had a report that came out this week that said the gender divide could decide the election in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada. What's your opinion? Does your research also support that conclusion? And I should note that they were looking at turnout and not necessarily partisan feelings, but of course there's a correlation. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is something that is really hard to know at this point because turnout is the big thing. We know kind of where some of these subgroups are gonna land, but when it comes to turnout, we know historically women turn out at higher rates than men, and particular subgroups, the gap is even larger. So among single women, for instance, in 2020, there's roughly a 10-point difference between how many single women turned out versus how many single men. And if we're seeing those kinds of disparities, given how strongly single women tend to support Democratic candidates, it could absolutely decide close races.
So that's on the single side. How much will the divide among divorced people affect November's election? Are you able to say or to hypothesize?
I mean, it's hard because we don't have the demographic data by state and county. So, we are running a national election, but the results really matter in particularly close states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Michigan. And so to the extent that there are large gender gaps there among people who are divorced, it will matter a great deal. I mean, the other thing too, just to remember in all this, is that when it comes to the divorce category, that can be a temporary category for a lot of people. So men are much more likely to get remarried than women, while women are much more likely to remain single. And the experience, I think, really changes your political perception and political priorities. Single women have very different political priorities than married women. For obvious reasons, like the gender pay gap is a much more substantial problem for you if you are responsible for paying, everything yourself, the rent, groceries, utilities. The fact that you are being paid less is a much bigger deal. So I think those kinds of things make the experience of being a single woman, put them in a very different political space.
It's interesting that you say that. Of course, there's reporting from Wells Fargo that indicates the wealth gap among men and women is affected by marriage. Even if you get married and then get divorced, those women have greater wealth than women who are never married. So there are political implications, there are wealth implications, and you are writing a book about the gender divide in America. So I'd love to zoom out and talk about this, because is it just divorce, or are there other qualifying life events, in the words of the insurance industry, that affect people's political affiliations and the way that they vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think the formative experiences of young people is just qualitatively different today than it was a generation earlier. So young people today are far less likely to date. They're far less likely to be a part of regular civic or religious activities that brings people together, women and men. And so what you have is far fewer opportunities to socialize and, as a result, empathize with someone of the opposite sex. Like you just have fewer experiences. And because so much of the formative experiences of young people is occurring online, it's migrated to social media, which is incredibly divisive and prone to putting out the most extreme information on regarding gender and gender dynamics. I think it further polarizes young people. You're hearing online, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, young women complaining about dates or their husbands, and vice versa, and that is being fed algorithmically to young people who are saying like, wow, I guess dating's pretty terrible, or I guess maybe marriage isn't for me because I'm much more comfortable on my own or with my friends. And so this experience has a profound impact, obviously, on what they think about relationships and marriage, but also what they think about politics, because we also know that young people are going to be single for a much longer period of time, with people getting married in their late 20s and early 30s. And that experience of living on your own, having to fend for yourself, puts you in a very different space, and there's a vulnerability there. I think particularly for women who, in the conversations we've had with them in focus groups and other places, talk a lot about safety and security. And again, that's a very different conversation we're having with single women than married women.